Well, Mr. President, we here in the Senate have a tradition of mutual respect among our fellow senators. We have a spirit of comity. It's a tradition I hold in high esteem. Last night, that tradition was violated, and the Senate went in a very bad direction. My Republican colleagues, I believe, were far too zealous in trying to enforce that tradition, and in doing so, were guilty of the exact same thing they were trying to police. My friend, the senator from Massachusetts, was reading a letter written by Mrs. Coretta Scott King, the widow of Martin Luther King Jr., to the Judiciary Committee. Her testimony about the nomination of then Judge Jeff Sessions to be a federal judge. For that, the chair and my friend, the majority leader, interrupted her remarks, invoked Rule 19, and forbid her from continuing. The chair directed the senator to take her seat. In my view, it was totally uncalled for. Senator Warren wasn't hurling wild accusations. She was reading a thoughtful and considered letter from a leading civil rights figure. Mr. President, anyone who watches the Senate floor on a daily basis could tell you that what happened last night was the most selective enforcement of Rule 19. My friend, the senator from Massachusetts, was here when one of her colleagues called the leadership of my dear friend Senator Reid cancerous, and that, quote, he doesn't care about the safety of our troops, unquote. That was not enforced as a Rule 19 violation. But reading a letter from Coretta Scott King, that was too much. Suggesting that the distinguished majority leader had repeatedly lied to the press, a comment made by a fellow Republican, by the way, that was fine. Reading the letter of a civil rights icon, at least to the other side, unacceptable. Mr. President, just last week, I heard a friend on the other side of the aisle just last week accuse me of engaging in a tear-jerking performance that belonged at the Screen Actors Guild Awards. It was only the second time that week that I had been accused of fake tears on the floor of the Senate, but I didn't run to the floor to invoke Rule 19. But when my friend from Massachusetts read a piece of congressional testimony by Coretta Scott King, she was told to sit down. Why was my friend from Massachusetts cut off when these other, much more explicit, much more direct, much nastier attacks were disregarded? Mr. President, there is a shocking double standard here when it comes to speech, and unfortunately, it is not constrained by the four walls of this chamber. While the senator from Massachusetts has my Republican colleagues up in arms by simply reciting the words of a civil rights leader, my Republican colleagues can hardly summon a note of disapproval for an administration that insults a federal judge, tells the news media to shut up, offhandedly threatens a legislator's career, and seems to invent new dimensions of falsehood each and every day. I certainly hope that this anti-free speech attitude is not traveling down Pennsylvania Avenue to our great chamber, especially, Mr. President, when the only speech being stifled is speech that Republicans don't agree with. Even speech that is substantive, relevant, on point to the matter this body is considering, and appropriate and measured in tone. And I'd make a broader point, Mr. President. This is not what America is about. Silencing speech, especially in this chamber. What we do here is debate. We debate fiercely and forcefully, but respectfully. The founders of the Republic, the titans of the early Senate, Webster, Clay, Calhoun, debated till they were blue in the face. From time to time, they probably had tough words for one another. We're not afraid of tough words in America. We don't look to censure speech. The rule is only intended to keep senators on the facts, to keep them from making baseless accusations about another's character. My friend from Massachusetts was following the letter and the spirit of the rule last night. She was engaging in that tradition of forceful but respectful debate when she was cut off. That is not what the Senate is about. That is not what our dear country is about. Mr. President, every member on the other side of the aisle ought to realize that what they did to Senator Warren was selective enforcement. It was the most selective enforcement of a rarely used procedure to interrupt her, to silence her. And it was the only violation of the spirit of mutual respect and comity in this body that occurred last night. I yield the floor.